Hello and welcome to the next video in my series about the Dark Eye core rules, and this is about spellcasting. And before I go through all the steps in detail, let me give you a quick overview of the steps and let me explain in my words how it works. First, you choose a spell, then you choose a target for the spell, then you can choose modifications of the spell, and roll a test that works like every other skill test. You roll on 3 attributes, use your skill value to make up for the rolls that failed, and then you subtract astral energy. You have to pay for casting the spell, and when the spell succeeded, you are going to apply the effect, and the effect usually is depending on the skill points you have left, the spell points you have left, the quality level you reached, and it may also depend on the number of astral energy, of the amount of astral energy you invested into the spell. This is roughly how it works, and I'm now going through all the steps in detail and explaining them. The first step I mentioned is choose a spell. You only have a limited selection of spells which you learn during your adventuring or which you learn during character creation. The average character who's starting at starting level experienced will have up to 12 spells. Later on you can learn more spells. So you choose a spell, and a spell has always a limited range it can be cast in, and you choose a target that is within that range, although you can modify the range in the next step to cast it on someone who is further away than the usual range of the spell. And the target does not only have to be within range, it has to be the right type of target. For example, there are some spells that can only be cast on living beings, or on inanimate beings, or on undead, or on demons, or on a certain type of object or something like that. So the type of target must also be right. And then you can choose modifications, like I already mentioned. For example, you can change the time it takes to cast a spell. The time to cast a spell can be 1 action, 2 actions, 4 actions, 8 actions, 16 actions, or 32 actions. It starts with 1 action and then just doubles. And what you can do is go in this list here, that is the list of casting times, and here you can go up or down 1 step, and this will make the spell more difficult to cast or easier to cast. If you take your time and take more time to cast the spell, it becomes easier. You get a -1 on casting the spell. If you try to cast the spell quicker, you get a +1 on the spell, and it becomes... Oh no, I explained it the wrong way. If you take your time, you get a +1 on the spell, and it becomes easier. If you want to cast it quicker, you get a -1 on the spell, and it will be more difficult. You can also change the range. The range can be touch, 4 paces, 8 paces, 16 paces, 32 paces, and 64 paces. And again, this doubles from 1 step to another, and you can go up 1 step here. You can't go down, but you can go up, and going up will make the spell more difficult, and it will give you a -1 modifier on the spell. Next thing you can change is the cost of the spell. Cost can be 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, or 32 astral points. And you can go up or down this list 1 step. If you go down and make the spell cheaper, it becomes more difficult. You get a -1 on the spell. And if you make it more expensive, invest more astral energy, it becomes easier, and you get a +1 on the spell. And what you can do is you can combine these modifications. So if you are really desperate and really good in a spell, you could have a spell that is cast quicker at a greater distance and costs you less than usual. That would be a -3 on your spell. So here's again listed what kind of modifications you can make with the name of the modification, and there are 2 modifications down here, or 1 described in this 1 point, and they are special. They say you're leaving out the gesture and you're leaving out the spoken formula. This is highly dependent on what tradition you are in, what tradition you have learned. For example, a guild mage usually casts a spell by saying a formula and by making a certain gesture. And if you leave one of the 2 out, you get -2 on the spell. And if you leave both out, you get -4 on the spell. This can happen, for example, when you are in a situation where you can't speak or where you can't make a gesture because you are in handcuffs, or because you're on the water or something. Or maybe you decide not to use gesture and formula because you're talking to someone and you want to read the mind of that person, and you don't want the person to know that you're reading his mind. So you would try to leave out gesture, and you would try to leave out the formula, and maybe make the spell take longer, and use more astral energy, invest more astral energy in it to make it a bit more easier and to not get the full -4 on the spell test. And in the next step, there is basically explained you have to use the technique, the formula, and the gesture, and it explains what happens if you cast a spell that takes several actions, which means it takes several combat rounds, and within these combat rounds you get attacked or get somehow distracted. What you have to do in such a case is roll a certain talent test to see if you can still keep concentrating on the spell, or if you're interrupted. Then after you know all the modifications, and there's one source of modification I haven't mentioned. It isn't explicitly mentioned here, I think. It depends on the spell. There are resistances against spells. There's a resistance against physical influence, so if someone tries to turn you into a toad, and there is a resistance against mind control or something. And it is not an active resistance. You don't make a resistance throw or something. No, you add the resistance value as a modifier to the spell test. If you cast in a mind control spell on someone who has a resistance of 3, you get -3 on your spell test. And then you roll the spell after you know all the modifications. And when you roll the test, you can have critical success or critical failure. Critical success is if you roll 2 times a 1 or 3 times a 1. Then you have automatically succeeded in the test, even if you roll something like 20, 1, 1. And the 20 would totally screw you up, and you would fail just by rolling this 20. If you roll 2 1s after that, you have succeeded, and you have succeeded critically. Which means you get more spell points in the end. You get a bonus on your spell points you have left, which gives you a higher quality level and a greater effect on your spell, and the spell becomes cheaper to cast. You don't have to pay as many astral points for your spell to cast. And if you critical fail on your test, that happens when you roll 20 2 times. Even if you could make up for the 2 20s with your ultra high attribute values and your super duper high skill value, your spell value, even if you could manage with 2 20s to succeed in the test with a positive skill value left, 2 20s are always a failure, and they are always a critical failure. And when you get a critical failure, you roll on this chart here, which works exactly like the optional chart for critical failure in combat, but this one is not optional. You roll on this chart, and you use 2d6, add the numbers together, and look what you get. And there's stuff in it like you get turned into like a toad, something like a toad, a small animal, or you lose your ability to cast spells for the next d6 days. So it can be really dangerous or inconvenient to make a critical failure when casting a spell. Then, after you roll the test, you are going to subtract the astral energy cost from your astral energy. Every spell has a specific astral energy cost, and you have to pay it when you cast the spell. You even have to pay for the spell when you fail the spell, but you only have to pay half of the cost. And the cost is not always fixed. Sometimes you can choose how many astral energy you want to invest into the spell, because more astral energy gives you a greater effect. And sometimes you have to invest astral energy to keep a spell up. For example, you cast a light and you have to invest 1 astral energy point every 5 minutes to keep the spell up. And sometimes you have to decide that before you cast the spell. Sometimes you can decide while the spell is going on if you want to keep it up, and then invest 1 astral energy point after another. How this exactly works is detailed described for every spell. So now you've cast the spell, you've paid your astral energy points. If you don't have enough points, astral energy points, to pay for a spell, you will simply fail. You can try to cast a spell, but you will fail, and the failure will use half of the cost of the spell and might even use all the astral energy points you have left. And if you have cast the spell successfully, you apply the effect, which is often based on the quality level of your result. And then it might say you are trying to influence the mind of someone so the person trusts you, but with higher quality level you might be able to completely mind control that person and send it into death, make it jump off a cliff. Otherwise the person may not be your friend and really trust you, but the person somehow likes you for a reason or something. But you don't have that much control over the person. And for a damage spell, for example, there's a damage spell that does 2d6 plus 2 times the quality level in damage, or 1d6 plus 2 times the quality level in damage. I think it's 1d6, I'm not quite sure. That is basically the steps to cast a spell, and then there are 2 things described about certain kinds of spells. This is about transformation spells. So if you try to transform a living being into another living being, or try to manipulate a living being, you cannot just transform everything you want. You can't just transform an elephant into a mouse, because the change of mass is too great. And this simply explains you that you can only transform a certain amount of mass, and if you transform more, it will be more expensive simply. And that is described here. And this is describing how illusions work, and illusions are simply not physical. You can walk through them, and they are not intelligent. You cannot create, for example, an illusion of a fighter and then tell this fighter to attack someone or run around or something, and you walk away and the illusion will be acting on its own. That is not possible. You can make an illusion for a certain time and walk away. That would be possible, but the illusion would be static. It would not change. It would be a constant sound or something you're seeing constantly. If you want the illusion to change, then you would have to concentrate on it and stay with it and basically make it do things. And it is never physical, the illusion, or usually it is not. You can just walk right through it, and you can't touch it really. And an illusion usually always has some kind of flaw. If you're really looking at it and trying to study it, you can make a perception test to see that there's something wrong with this illusion, because something is changing color or something is not natural about this what you're seeing, and that allows you to guess that you're dealing with an illusion and not with something that is real. So that's all the rules for the for spellcasting. The next thing will be the rules for ritual, how to perform a ritual. They're pretty much the same. There's a very, very similar mechanic. Nevertheless, I'm going through it in detail, but I will be referencing this description a lot to not have to repeat everything. So, if you have any questions about the spellcasting, feel free to ask. But else I have nothing more to say, and that's it for now. Bye.